Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, along with CBS Sports draft analyst Chris Trapasso for the Chris Trapasso Draft Show every single week and many times at the NFL Combine. Both of us have booked our travel for the Combine. We're going to be good to go out there doing a bunch of shows. So you're going to want to look forward to that in a couple of weeks. But in the lead up, we have time to look at mocks, to talk about rumors, to analyze different draft philosophies and such and forth. So, and we also have now a list of those who are going to be at the combine. And yeah, it's all the quarterbacks. We have a lot to discuss. But I want to start out with this, Chris. I want to start out with trade up scenarios because one of the biggest rumors coming out, at least involving the Vikings, coming out of Super Bowl week, is that the New England Patriots could consider not taking a quarterback at number 3, and the team mentioned for a trade up, the Minnesota Vikings. So why don't you give me your reaction to that, and then we can go from there and talk about it.
Well, to me, this harkens back to the last 2 or 3 years that we've had this conversation, when it was, like we said, it was for Zach Wilson potentially in 2021, Trey Lance, whatever. That we agree, and I feel like most of your listeners and viewers agree, that if it's for a quarterback, that's the one position that this huge advocate for trading down and someone that is against trading up, I'm fine for doing that. I mean, you don't necessarily want to trade away the next 3 years of first round picks and kind of get yourself into a hole with a young quarterback. But if number 3 or maybe number 5 with the Los Angeles Chargers, there's kind of been some rumors about Jim Harbaugh and their new GM Joe Hortis would maybe be willing to trade back. If you are like, oh my gosh, our analytics from Kwesi, Kevin O'Connell loves, let's say, Jayden Daniels or Drake Maye, and they are there, one of those two quarterbacks, or you happen to like both of them and you're like, hey, if we get to 5 and there's only one off the board, or whatever the case may be, if you think you can get one of those quarterbacks, I'm completely fine with it. Even though, yes, you would probably have to stomach kind of a big trade up, and probably not just the normal trade up cost, because it seems like there's always a little tax when you're moving up to get a quarterback.
Yeah, no question about it. And I did an article looking at what it would cost if the Vikings even just gave up their first and second and next year's second, and how that compares. And of course, every draft chart, whether it's the Jimmy Johnson chart or the one that Brad Spielberger and Jason Fitzgerald put together, they all think that you are not doing the most efficient thing. But if you factor in for getting a quarterback, there is such a massive surplus value that is gaining every single year when you have the quarterback on the rookie contract. Just to give you an idea, Bryce Young's cap hit will never be over $13 million. Next year, there are 12 quarterbacks, and will probably be 13, that are making over $40 million per year average annual value. So that's $27 million difference between what the rookie quarterback is making and what even just your average starting quarterback. And that's only going up, by the way, as franchise quarterbacks will be at $45-50 million. So if you have cap hits that are 45-50 million bucks, and your rookie contract for your quarterback is 12 in their third year, I mean, you are just gaining such a huge advantage that it's worth giving up draft picks, because you can fill in the rest of that space by using your cap space to go out and get free agents. But my question is, from New England's perspective, like, put yourself in their shoes. With 3 quarterbacks at the top of the draft that are considered potential franchise QBs, why would they think about moving down? Like, is this one of those, hey, make us an offer kind of types of things? Or are they actually in a position where you believe it might make sense to move out of the third pick?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the former there over the latter, that it's more like this new regime there, the post-Bill Belichick regime. Gerard Mayo as the head coach is like, hey, like, we've looked at these quarterbacks, we like them, but let's stir up some potential trade up market for maybe more than just the Vikings. If they get 3, 4, 5 different deals and they can say, hey, Vikings, we have this deal from the Raiders, this one from the Falcons, see where the dominoes fall with Kirk Cousins, with Justin Fields. There's not as many, or nearly as many, veteran quarterbacks set to be on the market. Like last year, there was like Rodgers and Derek Carr, and we're not going to see as much, but there will be a few of those dominoes that will fall that will take some of those teams out of the quarterback market. That's what it seems like to me, because what you're kind of hinting at, and me being someone that watches a lot of AFC East games, I have no idea why a new regime wouldn't be like, we have the third pick. We should just pick one of these quarterbacks right now.
But yeah, and I think there is an argument for both sides for New England. On one side, you could say, hey, look, if you get a chance to get your quarterback at the top of the draft, then you got to get him. And what are you doing? But at the same time, when we look at Justin Fields, I would not be shocked if Justin Fields goes somewhere else and has more success than he did in Chicago, because they gave him nothing. And I'm not saying he's going to be a great quarterback somewhere else, but they gave him nothing until really this year, when they got, DJ Moore there and improved their offensive line and so forth. But even their offensive coordinator, I wasn't really sold on. If you bring in Jayden Daniels to that situation, you have no linemen, no wide receivers. You're really trying to build a lot of this from scratch. Are you in a better place taking someone else's multiple first round draft picks, or maybe a potential player, considering that, Carolina set that standard by trading DJ Moore as part of the deal to move up to number one? Are you in a better place if you are the New England Patriots, getting the foundation, getting multiple draft picks at the top, as opposed to, and look, this is a great receiver draft. Maybe you could take two of them. Like, you really need wide receivers. It's a draft with good offensive linemen at the top. Those are players that they desperately need. Would you prefer that to somebody who is maybe even if it's Daniels, somebody that's a little more project E that you're going to have to work with, and whose success may depend a lot on the supporting cast?
Yeah, that's a perfect counter to what I just said. And it, not that I don't think the Patriots are like, let's try to and expect to rekindle the Tom Brady era. But if we remember back 20 plus years ago, Tom Brady was dropped into a pretty good team. They had a good offensive line. They had a top 5 or so defense. And it wasn't, hey, Tom Brady, go win us games right away. Now, the NFL, of course, looks a lot different. The landscape at the quarterback spot is not what it once was. That a lot of quarterbacks in 2000, 2001 were brought along very slowly. But it wouldn't be crazy if Robert Kraft and Gerard Mayo, that's been there forever, are like, let's not pick a quarterback at number 3 in year 1 and just totally ruin him. And he's got, shell shock by year 2, and he's scrambling out of the pocket when there's no pressure there because he had a terrible line. He couldn't throw to anyone. Let's get maybe Marvin Harrison Jr. or trade back and get Rome Odunze at 11 or whatever the case may be, and build the rest of the team. They have a lot of cap space, so they could be some players in free agency. This is the Patriots, by the way. So it seems like they probably wanted to drum up trade value, because I don't think they're just willing to move down for nothing. But what you just pointed out, because this team is so far away from being good, and it really feels like they have needed to rebuild over the last few years, that even if you put Jayden Daniels or Drake Maye and expect them to have a relatively good season by rookie quarterback standards, that team is not a legitimate contender in what has become a really loaded AFC.
And I think you do have to factor in Mac Jones into this conversation, not keeping Mac Jones. What I mean is what happened to Mac Jones, which was he came in. He's obviously not a special player, but he was able to get his team to the playoffs right away. The roster then went to hell, and then they brought in Matt Patricia, just a disastrous decision. Bill O'Brien coming back. These are not good ideas, and gave him zero to work with. And then by the end of the year, Mac Jones is on the bench. He's being considered a bust. He could eventually have like a Ryan Tannehill type of comeback somewhere else, but he was never going to be the type of guy to survive that. Maybe if you look at Daniels and the way that he can run around, but Justin Fields was able to run around too. If you're not like Trevor Lawrence had a terrible first year in Jacksonville, and it set him back an entire year to where it was just completely lost to how bad Jacksonville was. And I think all of this stuff, it has to be factored. Like, if I'm making that decision, if I'm the New England Patriots, the other part of it too is, are you going to be sold 100%? This guy is our franchise guy, or not? Because I don't think that Daniels or Drake Maye is a perfect prospect. I think Caleb Williams is still easily going number 1. I'm sure hear some stuff well, it could be somebody else, but the NFL always tries that. Caleb Williams is going to go number one. The Bears are moving on from Fields. That's how I feel at this moment.
Same.
But between Drake Maye and Jayden Daniels, if you're in the Vikings seat, are they worth it? Are they prospects that would be worth trading up? And you think if you're the Vikings, okay, we gave up 3 firsts, but we've got our franchise guy for a very long time. Like, break down those two guys. Would it have to be May? Could it be either one of them? Like, how are you looking at those two guys?
Yes, I think it would be absolutely worth it for either one of those two. I have Drake Maye graded ahead of Jayden Daniels. It's not a sizable gap, but it's not like hundredths of a point in my scouting grade book. And again, I'm gonna say this a lot, but it's Patriot situation, Viking situation in terms of the talent. It's completely different. The offensive minded head coach, it comes from the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. He's gotten, normal production from Kirk Cousins. And like we mentioned in last week's episode, Josh Dobbs played well. Nick Mullins was having 400-yard games. So, yes, I think they are as good, if not better, than Anthony Richardson and even at CJ Stroud as prospects. Now, that's not to say that I'm expecting them to eclipse what CJ Stroud did as a rookie, because I do think the scheme has to be kind of factored in. Bobby Sloak did a great job there. But in terms of just looking at them as prospects, what they're capable of doing, the arm talent, the athleticism, the experience at the collegiate level, they've played a lot of football and have been good for multiple seasons. Downfield throwing is very good. Drake Maye, I think, is a very underrated athlete in that because he's so good inside the pocket, you just think, oh, he's a pocket passer. But you watch him on film and it's like, man, they're running like QB power and he's breaking off 30-yard runs. So he brings you that element too. They feel like they should be number 2 or number 3 overall picks. And if they weren't in a class with Caleb Williams, number 1 overall pick type players, I really think they're, and to me, Drake Maye feels a little safer because he went into the season with a lot of hype and maybe wasn't quite as good as 2022, but didn't have this huge regression, even though he lost some talent. Jayden Daniels was on the radar. And we thought, hey, he could maybe be one that jumps into the first round. Now, all of a sudden, he's going to be a top 3 pick. So I think there's a little bit more uncertainty with him. But yes, I think if you're the Vikings, and that's why I kind of have to, I'm grading an entire draft just from a collective NFL angle. But if you're just narrowing it down to the Vikings, I think they are definitely like clear steps ahead of the, Kenny Pickett's or the Daniel Jones or the Dwayne Haskins that went in the first round, where you're kind of like, really, are they first rounders, or is this Blaine Gabbert, Jake Locker 2.0? I think they are bona fide top tier quarterback prospects.
Let's talk about both individually here.
Okay.
Start with Jayden Daniels. It seems more likely that Jayden Daniels will be available at number 3, if that's the deal that could potentially be there. But I don't know. I mean, it's going to be a matter of preference. And sometimes we think we know. We're like, oh, yeah, it's going to go just like this. And then the NFL draft has a way of being like, someone like Justin Fields is not as high of a draft pick as you think, or, whatever it may be. Daniels, to me, seems like he has more of a chance to be a player that a franchise wouldn't fully buy into than May, because May is so much more of a pocket passer. And ultimately, playmaking wins. We see this all over. We see it with Mahomes. We see it with Lamar Jackson. But Jackson, Mahomes, all these guys, they still spend 60, 70% of the time in the pocket. And with Jayden Daniels, he had an unbelievable season, Heisman season. And I was watching some of him. And one thing that keeps popping up, though, when I watch him is in my brain, it's been trained by watching NFL football for many years to see the ball come out. Like, guy gets to the back of his drop, he makes his reads, and there comes the football to his receiver. And with Daniels, I feel like it's a little tick late sometimes. And I'm going, throw it, buddy. Throw it, buddy. Oh,
ding, ding,
and he's
ding,
taking
ding,
off.
ding.
And he's running for 50 yards. Like, oh, okay. Well, he's running for 50 yards. It's fine. That is my concern there, that he would get pressured. He would take sacks. And here's my worry as well. I mean, this guy gets his ass kicked like in some of these games sometimes. And with Drake Maye, I feel like the ball comes out faster and he doesn't take hits all the time. Like, sometimes it's Looney Tunes cartoonish the way that Jayden Daniels can walk himself into hits like he's Wile E. Coyote or something. And that would actually be worrisome to me, because You're there in Buffalo. I was there in Buffalo with Tyrod Taylor, who kind of did the same stuff. And I think he's a better talent than Tyrod Taylor, who was a sixth rounder. But I always worry when I see that, when I see the ball not quite coming out when it should, and when I see guys that take too many hits because I worry about their health.
All right. I'm wondering if you have somehow gotten into my scouting gradebook and read my report on Jayden Daniels. So, for any of you watching this, I wasn't not paying attention to Matt. I was rereading my scouting report on Jayden Daniels that I did about a month or two ago. And there's a lot of positives in it. But what Matt pointed out toward the end, I wrote, which this is something that you didn't say, but he did not face much pressure at all. Like that's just like normal pressure where, like you're saying, a lot of times, oh, he scrambles, he must have been pressured. But no, he really wasn't. He was just like, I'm just going to run here. And being able to pick up 50 yards on the ground in the SEC is not an easy task. So you have to give him props for that. But you're right about the ability to, or the tendency to just say, I'm just going to take off and run. And then I wrote, can stare down his first option a little too long, which led to pass breakups and interceptions. Doesn't happen often, but will. So I think at this point, this late in his collegiate career, being an older prospect, again, it was easy to kind of be, I don't want to say tricked by it, but fall in love with, like you're saying, all of the scrambling ability. And oh, that's not even a 15-yard run. That's a 40-yard touchdown. But oh, he had the slant right there. Why didn't he like make that throw? So that's, to your point, I could see the NFL being like, look, if he's unable to really quickly pull the trigger now, I'm worried about the durability and him leaning on that too much in the NFL. Now, certainly Drake Maye take some hits. But what I've noticed too, just to kind of wrap this point, when I started to say that he didn't see pressure a lot, I have noticed from like Patrick Mahomes on, and there's not any, I don't think there's any study that's been done on this. The quarterbacks that come into the NFL after a final season that like were pressured like on 20% of their dropbacks, a lot of the times they can have add in any other attribute, a big arm, great downfield touch. Once they get to the NFL, and if they are a top 5 to 10 to whatever first round pick that they're going to start right away, they struggle early on. It's the Josh Allens and the Patrick Mahomes that didn't have amazing offensive lines and already had to get the experience of, oh crap, what do I do now that I'm pressured? Do I slide up in the pocket? Do I take off and run? Do I ad lib to my left, to my right? And Daniels, it seems like if you're watching the highlights, oh, he was pressured a ton of, like his offensive line was bad, but in reality, it wasn't. And it was a lot of self-induced pressure. And you being a big PFF guy, I'm a big PFF guy. They always track that. Like, was that pressure on the quarterback or the offensive lineman? So you would certainly, if you're an NFL team, if you want to trade up, if you're the Vikings, have to factor that in. And this goes beyond the film. Maybe that's more at the combine interview or during a pre-draft visit. See if you can dive into the processing of Jayden Daniels. Like, why didn't you make that throw here? Why that second read that you looked front side for the slant, then you looked backside for the dig? It was there, but then you just ran to your left for 30 yards, and that's not going to fly on a regular basis in the NFL.
Jayden Daniels scares me a lot more as a prospect than Drake Maye does. And that's exactly why. And you talk about the PFF and the stats. Kevin Cole he used to work at PFF, now does his own thing and has a great newsletter, comes on the show sometimes,
Smart
studying
guy.
analytics, studying things that translate from college to the NFL. And that pressure to sack rate is what they call it, meaning if the guy gets pressured, how often does he go down? And Michael Penix was very good at not taking sacks, and Bo Nix was very good at it, but Daniels was not. If he got pressured, he actually got sacked kind of a lot, which
Which
is
is crazy
really
because you watch him and you think, oh, he probably ran away from a lot of pressure, but in reality, he didn't.
right, right. And that's, I think, quite concerning for the NFL. Now, that doesn't mean I wouldn't do it, but I think if we compare both guys and you were saying, what's the risk level or what does it feel like the risk level is to trade up for Drake Maye if he was there at number 3 versus trading up for Jayden Daniels at number 3? It seems to me that the risk level is a lot less and that the Vikings for Drake Maye and that the Vikings would be a better fit with Drake Maye for a pocket quarterback who can make plays rather than someone who starts with playmaking and you have to train to be a pocket quarterback. Because I think we see this out of the shotgun, long developing routes that you have to stick with as the quarterback, make the right reads. And then Drake Maye just has a phenomenal football. Like he just throws such a beautiful ball. I've just had it out of my mind that the Vikings could get Drake Maye. Is it realistic, do you think, that Washington could pick Jayden Daniels number 2 and then Maye be available at number 3?
Absolutely. And Lance Zierlein was on, I don't know whose podcast he was on, but that kind of circled the week before the Super Bowl. He said that he had heard from a few NFL executives that Drake Maye could be like the Will Levis guy. Now, that would be, to me, bonkers if he like fell all the way out of the first round, but he kind of labeled him as the I mean, of course, pretty early, right post Senior Bowl, the quarterback who could slip a little bit. And there seems to always be at least one in the first round. And he labeled it as Drake Maye, which I think would be kind of crazy because I think, like you mentioned, he's just a lot safer, but gives you just about all of the same strengths as Jayden Daniels. He's good down the field. I mean, maybe not quite as accurate, although I have like a working theory that downfield accuracy, in my opinion, we also need to factor in the receivers and how good they are at tracking the ball and throttling up, throttling down, body control. That sometimes you see throws, you're like, oh, that was actually not a bad throw, but the receiver didn't make a play on it. To have Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors probably is a little bit better than what Drake Maye had this past season at North Carolina. The only real negative I have for Drake Maye is that occasionally he misses like behind and low on his wide receivers. Like if he misses, if it's like a deep dig route, there might be like not the perfect ball placement. It's a little behind, but beyond that, athleticism, size, pocket ability, huge arm. He reminds me not quite the talent, but he reminds me a lot of Justin Herbert. And was a kind of a pretty common comparison going into his final season. And I'm glad again that he didn't have this catastrophic drop off where it's like, oh, maybe he's really not a first rounder. Like he played very good football on a team that had a bad defense and they were in big holes and they had to rely on him a lot. So and plugging him into that Minnesota offense, I mean, I was going to say he could be like, that CJ Stroud type effect to push them to the playoffs. But I think if you look at Houston's roster at the start of this past season and Minnesota's is better. So who knows how much further Drake Maye could take them. And I like that, again, he has a lot of experience, 3-4 year starter. That certainly helps a lot in terms of the transition and not being such a steep learning curve once he gets to the NFL.
All right, this is going to lead us into our next subject, which is looking at a mock draft that caught my eye. But I want you to rank these things for me for Are they good ideas for the Vikings, from the best idea to the worst idea of these. And this, of course, is all if Kirk Cousins is not coming back. But
Sure.
Trading everything for Drake Maye, trading everything for Jayden Daniels, picking JJ McCarthy at number 11, or trading down and picking Bo Nix. How would you rank those 4 things as far as best to worst idea?
Best idea is trading up for Drake Maye. I mean, of course, if he could fall to you at 11, you would like sign up for that any day of the week. That's number 1. I would say number 2, I'm between the Jayden Daniels and the JJ McCarthy options. Now, from last week when I kind of talked up JJ McCarthy and said I had him graded higher than Bo Nix, some of the Purple Insider listeners were like, oh my God, I would fall on my sword if it was JJ McCarthy. There's no way I want him. I like him. I think especially in Minnesota, again, the fit would be good. It's just, I could understand why listeners would think that because like we talked about last week, he just didn't really throw the football a lot. And he was not the centerpiece of that national title winning team. But I think the tools are there for him to be good enough as a rookie and then eventually really take the reins and become a franchise guy. So I'll go a little bit controversial and say number 2, just stay put, pick JJ McCarthy at 11. And then trade back just because you get more picks, Bo Nix, and then trade up for Jayden Daniels. So, of course, I have Jayden Daniels ranked and graded ahead of those to JJ McCarthy and Bo Nix, but you have to factor in, the cost of trading up for someone who we both agree is a little bit of a risky prospect, despite, all the dynamic athleticism and the downfield touch.
I like your list. It's hard for me because trading up for Jayden Daniels would be so much fun. And
Oh yeah.
sometimes I have to like rein myself in of like, can you imagine the shows that we would do through mini camp, rookie camp, training camp if they traded everything for Jayden Daniels? But when I watch him, my brain goes, I'm a little nervous. I'm a little nervous about some of those things. And all that, he might blow all that out of the water. But what you're giving up with a roster that has holes in it is so much. And I'm the one who sat here for years talking about how random it can be with quarterback drafts. And the one that could resonate with Vikings fans is Akili Smith going number 3 and Dante Culpepper going number 11. Many times it's not the order in which they're drafted.
Mm-mm.
So they would have to truly believe so much more in Jayden Daniels than, say, Bo Nix or JJ McCarthy for me to say, yeah, give up the farm. That's a totally good idea, because you are going to have to build this roster out. And if there's anything the playoffs showed us is all these teams that were there usually complete teams. They're not just, hey, look, you got a quarterback. Hey, look, you got a one, good receiver or two. It's usually Kansas City. Trent McDuffie had to make big plays. L'Jarius Sneed had to make big plays. You can't just be that. So are you going to be able to build the rest of your team? But if they did it, I'd be like, this is amazing. This is great.
Oh my gosh, it would be awesome for the next couple months and then into the season for me on Purple Insiders and for you, for all your listeners. You have to look at it, and this is kind of stealing from like an idea that like you just had there. You would have to ask yourself, is Jayden Daniels like a first round pick and a third round pick and a fourth round pick better than JJ McCarthy? And to me, I would say no. I think he is graded higher than JJ McCarthy to me. We'll see what happens at the combine with how athletic McCarthy is compared to Daniels, all that. But I would answer that question with no. So if you're saying, just stay put at 11, or you can tell me that we can get extra picks and still get a quarterback in Bo Nix, you also have to factor that in as well. And for as good as we've talked about this Vikings roster is, there are still some holes that kind of need to be patched on defense. You probably know those holes better than I do and your listeners, but this is not a team that's just like, hey, Joe Flacco in 2008, just put him in there and that's a Super Bowl winning team immediately, or, a high level contender in their conference. I think you have to kind of continue to go with the idea of it's a team building process, not only just find any quarterback and, for the next couple of years, you're kind of barren with those early picks.
What makes this hard to talk about is, so I've talked to recently, and I was out in Vegas and so forth. I'm just going to say
Mm.
three people who were or are professional evaluators of football. Okay, I'm just going to say that. I'm going to be
Okay,
very
Matt.
broad.
Okay.
Okay. And I asked them all about McCarthy, Nix, and Daniels. And I got wildly different opinions from
Yep.
all three on
I
these
believe
guys.
it.
One person really loved Nix. Another person was like, nah, I don't know. One person thought, hey, the more you start these guys, the better the chances they are in college, the better the chance of success. Another person said that's not real. One person absolutely loved McCarthy. Another person said he's a game manager type, which I think may be a little unfair, but he was in college with Michigan, so that is true. I mean, there's such a wide range of opinions even within the game. So sometimes we're like, well, the NFL thinks, and it's like, well, the NFL as a whole thought Will Levis wasn't good, but a lot of times with these other quarterbacks, it really is just depending on who you want. So it seems with these guys, there's just a lot of discussion, and maybe it will start to get sorted out when we get to the combine.
Yeah, definitely. I think this class after Caleb Williams that you pointed out earlier, there will be maybe more of a wide opinion on the order than we've seen. I'm like, this is at the top, one of the probably the best quarterback class since 2018, with just like not just two names or three names like last year or in 2019 with Kyler Murray, Daniel Jones, and Dwayne Haskins. There's like four, maybe five. And I don't think there's any like, oh, well, yeah, he's probably number 2 and he's probably number 3. You will get that. We'll get that. I'll get that at the combine. It really just depends on, of course, scheme fit, what you value at the position or not. And the weights that you have for all those individual things, because they're all, I mean, of course, every quarterback's different, but they were in different type systems. They were asked to do a lot of different things. We kind of talked about this last week. So to me, I think what you outlined with Jayden Daniels and the inability to really navigate pressure and chaos around him and just kind of lean into his athleticism, that is a little scary, even as good as he was at doing that in the SEC. And it's fine if you disagree with this. I'm a little concerned about Bo Nix because he was really in that. I mean, if you want to say JJ McCarthy, and this will be what we'll hear with JJ McCarthy, like, they ran the ball 50 times a game. He was never really the guy. Bo Nix wasn't, to me, really the guy at Oregon either. I mean, the 77% completion percentage and any, accuracy stats, it's like, man, like, I know that you pointed out last week that like intermediate level PFF had him graded really highly, but you're going to get the read and see and hear this, that he was really highly accurate, surgically accurate. I didn't really necessarily see that. I didn't think he was, 77% completion compared to, mid 60s. Like, he's 10% higher than all the other quarterbacks. The system was a lot different. And if in your final season, if you're not doing that in an offense that's throwing the football a lot, I mean, it's just hard to tell. It's almost like an incomplete grade. And I've talked about this before and I've written about it. Like with Tua Tagovailoa and with Mac Jones, they threw the ball down the field at Alabama, and I had Tua graded highly. But if you look back at anything that I wrote on Tua toward the end of that, 2020 draft class, that it was like, I kept saying it's almost incomplete because the receivers were so good. I don't know what he's going to be like until his receivers are that good. Now, ironically, he's gotten pretty good receivers in Miami, but a lot of the stuff that extra stuff he could never really do. So is Bo Nix going to get an offense where it's going to be bubble screen, wide receiver screen, drag route, like RPO? Maybe. And maybe with the Vikings, they would say, look, you don't need to be awesome. We have Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, Hawkinson, a good run game, a good offensive line. But again, me looking at the draft as a whole, he's the one that scares me because at like 24 years old, kind of just going into this gimmicky role to kind of boost the stats, that scares me a little bit. I would aim, we've talked about this a lot, I would aim higher at the quarterback spot. I want those big time throws more frequently, and I didn't see a ton of those from Bo Nix at Oregon.
Well, now that you talk about that, let's get into a mock draft. And I want to do this on every episode going forward here. Look at different mock drafts and talk about scenarios involving the Vikings. And our friend Trevor Sikkema at PFF does a tremendous job over there. We'll have him on the show again at some point very soon, but he put out a post Super Bowl mock. And here's how this thing played out. So JJ McCarthy in this one goes to Washington at number 10. And so the Vikings draft at 11, Jared Verse, who is an edge rusher. I assume I'm pronouncing that correctly, for Florida State. And then they trade back into the first round at number 30 for Bo Nix. Now, you just went over all your skepticism about Bo Nix. I'll just say this to balance that out a bit, that people that I have talked to who are a little bit higher on Bo Nix say that they were impressed by how he operated that offense. And he couldn't have put up any better statistics. It's like, well, were the statistics real or not? He certainly couldn't have done any better. And if you have a guy who has total command of the offense in Minnesota, you're going to find a lot of open wide receivers. I mean, there were stats on this about how often even Kirk Cousins was throwing to wide open wide receivers. And guess what? It's pretty high because they have a good offensive mind at drawing up route combinations, and they have great weapons, and they have good protection as of just last year, but that can even get better. So maybe there is an argument to, even if you don't see this quote like upside for Bo Nix, which is funny because he was like a 5-star and runs a 4.6, and I expect him to be fast at the combine. But even if you don't see like this massive arm or this flawless accuracy, if he understands where to go with the football and then can make a play out of structure every once in a while, and is very cheap on a rookie contract, you could have a lot of success with that. I think we've seen guys like that, including Brock Purdy, including Jalen Hurts, have a lot of success in being that way. So that would be my argument for doing it anyway, something like this. And even heck, Like Teddy Bridgewater was kind of like this. He wasn't a supreme athlete, didn't have a wild arm or anything. That was actually criticized. Didn't run for 1,000 yards, but won a division title with them in his second season by being just effective and probably would have improved from there. So there's kind of the pro Bo Nix, pro draft a defensive end and then trade back into the first. How do you feel about it?
Okay, so your previous question that I ranked trading back and picking Bo Nix is my lead, or I guess my third or like third best scenario. That again makes it seem like I would hate that idea, but me being such a trade down advocate, I was first thinking, move from 11 to like 15 and then pick him. In this case, to just stay put at 11, pick Jared Verse, who is as pro ready of an edge rusher, and we'll certainly dive into all the other positions outside of quarterback in the coming weeks and months, but very high end, high floor edge rusher that you don't have a lot of projection with, which is kind of different from what the Vikings have kind of leaned into at that edge rusher spot after picking Danielle Hunter. We've talked about that a lot. And then waiting all the way until pick 30, you said, to get Bo Nix. I like that idea a lot because that just gives you that fifth year option, of course, and it's a lot better value than just trading up from 11 or doing any other thing with Bo Nix. So if they feel like let's let him operate this offense that's going to get guys open scheme wise and just from the personnel, Jefferson and Addison and Hockenson, then that I could be totally fine with, because again, I certainly could be wrong on this. And I think it's important, one last thing, that you've kind of taught me, and I've gotten better with this, that when we used to play that game, and we will eventually, to compare the first round, like the top first round guys to busts. And I always write that article now at CBS, and like the comments on it on Twitter are just like, you're so mean. These guys are not going to be that bad. And it's like every year, like last year, and I'm not patting myself on the back, I've gotten a lot of guys wrong, especially a quarterback. I was not high on Bryce Young. He was my number 3 quarterback, and I didn't take a lot of crap, and I get it. That's part of my job. But it was, oh, how can you, like, everyone loves Bryce Young. He's amazing. He's the shoo-in for the first pick. So, and he had a horrible rookie season. And Will Levis slips all the way to the second and was actually pretty good early on until some injuries. And obviously CJ Stroud had such a awesome rookie year, winning offensive rookie of the year, that we have to realize that, like, if there's 4 quarterbacks who go in the first round, 2 of them are probably going to stink. Like, let's just not be so full of ourselves that we think, oh, this is going to be CJ Stroud 2.0. This is going to be Josh Allen 2.0. This is going to be Russell Wilson 2.0. Like, so if the Vikings are like, look, we like him, and maybe with other teams he wouldn't work, and they think, let's get that 5th-year option, I would be okay with that late in the draft, in the first round, for a quarterback, the most valuable position on the field, regardless pretty much of who it would be at the top of this quarterback class.
Yeah, and I love when you do that article because everyone gets very mad at you, and that's really funny because people want to hear that.
But I
Every
always drop
prospect
your
is
name. I always try to drop your name so I can
appreciate that.
deflect some of it. I'm just like, hey, this is Matt Coller from Purple. I plug Purple Insider, but I'm like, any other hate mail or whatever you want to call it, direct it to Matt Coller on Twitter.
Yes, okay, but I get enough of that anyway. When it comes, but I appreciate that because we all want to be told that every prospect is going to be the next whatever, and out of 32 first rounders, maybe 10 become anything, and then the rest, like how many even sign or get signed to a 5th-year option by their teams? It's not that high of a ratio, which is why the teams always feel with quarterbacks that you have to be fully sold. So it's everyone in the organization's fault, not just the GM who said, "Why don't we just take a shot?" It's complicated when it comes to that. So, I think with an idea like this, I would be very much in support of it, trading back in and getting an edge rusher. And when you try to do the odds for everything, like what are the odds that or what are the odds and implications of trading up for Jayden Daniels? How hard would it be to build around him, even if he's good? How screwed are you if he's bad? And the level of screwed if he's bad is epic if you trade up for Jayden Daniels. You do not have a 49ers roster that you could survive this. If you trade back and you blow the Bo Nix draft pick, It's not like you can't draft somebody else. And if you're pairing it with Sam Darnold, for example, whose name has been brought up, and you're having a bridge quarterback, or if it's Baker Mayfield or somebody else, like you can try again. If you can't really try again, if you trade up for Jayden Daniels, like that is your one and only shot. And I think with Daniels, I'd be afraid of that. I would be okay with it, but I'd be like, okay, it's either live or die on that guy. It wouldn't feel like that with Bo Nix. It'd be like, all right,
Mm-mm.
this is it's a good swing. Kind of like, in a way, what Tennessee did with Will Levis, where they picked him. Great job. Great swing. Where Philadelphia picked Jalen Hurts. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a swing you want to take. Even the Ravens, when they draft Lamar Jackson, they had already drafted a tight end in the first. That was a swing. Like, well, we can't let him keep falling down the board. Let's just take a shot at him.
Mm-hmm.
And if Lamar Jackson hadn't been good, and no one would have said what a terrible pick. They would have been like, oh, well, they took a shot at it with the 32nd pick. The same would be this kind of thing. You're not like every part of the organization has to be all in on this one guy. You can just be like, oh, all right, well, let's see if this works. And if it doesn't, we do something else. I want to ask you about the top of this draft, this mock,
Mm-hmm.
which has Caleb Williams going to the Bears. We all think that's happening. But this has the Denver Broncos trading up to take Drake Maye with the second draft pick. So they would have to jump over the Vikings. And here's what Trevor's projected price would be, which is 2024, 2025 first and a 2026 first. So 3 first round picks to trade up. If the Vikings are just ahead of Denver, if the Vikings have the chance to do what they did in his mock versus trading up for Drake Maye at number 2, which one of those things would you like?
So the Vikings pretty much sending that huge similar trade package to get to 2. Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Yep.
For Drake Maye. Because I am such a big Drake Maye fan, and he's actually not graded that much lower than Caleb Williams to me, I would be okay with that. I mean, again, it's kind of like I'm trying to play both sides of the fence here because I am such an advocate of trading down. I literally had my wife make me a shirt that said trade down to wear during the draft last year. But the one exception, of course, is quarterback. And if the Vikings, which you talking earlier, I was thinking in my head, and this kind of works here now. To me, the biggest question, if we're like sure that the Vikings are very interested and are going to pick a quarterback, the biggest question of this draft process is, do Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, do they like the Kirk Cousins style of quarterback? The guy that, to use a prototype of what O'Connell and what Sean McVay and Zach Taylor and Bobby Slowick and Kyle Shanahan have had their entire careers, like cerebral, underneath, boot action, get it out to the first read, accurate, pretty much an extension of the play caller on the field, or like we have been talking about, you and me, for the last 3 off seasons, or I guess 3 draft seasons. Are they finally ready to aim higher? Because I think if it's door 1, then you trade back, you almost try to pick, like you're saying, Bo Nix as late as possible. But if they're like, actually, I want to see, and we still really haven't seen it with the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree now that Brock Purdy has really taken off, a high-level athlete with big-time arm talent in the Kyle Shanahan / Kevin O'Connell / Sean McVay offense. So if it's door 1, it's Bo Nix. And to me, the best one in this class, if it's door number 2, like let's aim for the moon at the quarterback spot, it's Drake Maye, obviously after Caleb Williams. And if you're aiming for a quarterback that highly, then you might have to give up 3 first-round picks. And if he hits, I think the Vikings are, again, not having a 49ers roster, but are good enough roster-wise and have enough young talent at key positions to be really good. And ultimately, in 2 or 3 years, Vikings fans wouldn't really care that those selections were not, assets that the team had in 2025 and beyond.
The Kevin O'Connell element of this is super interesting
Yeah.
because here's what we learned last year is that Kevin O'Connell is not going to adapt his offense. He is going to run his stuff. And if you
Oh,
can't
yeah.
do it, then you're not his quarterback, which How different is that from everybody else? I don't know. It might not be that different from how almost every coach would approach this. But what we saw with Josh Dobbs is I think the failure of Josh Dobbs was one, just regression. Regression happens, a guy who's not that good to begin with. But also, there was not an adjustment of the offense. It was a pass first offense that required a lot of reads and a lot of changes at the line of scrimmage and a lot of timing and a very accurate quarterback. And Josh Dobbs was not ready to do that with the offense and is not capable of doing that with the offense. But yet they went into a game against Chicago and threw 38 times in a game where he was struggling and they were still running the ball effectively. And it's like they're not going to just completely blow this up because I think Kevin O'Connell believes this thing works when
It
it's
does.
run correctly. And it does, as we've seen it from Kirk Cousins. But the problem with Kirk Cousins is always that there's physical limitations. There's throws that can't be made arm strength wise, and there's definitely plays that can't be made outside of structure. And I don't know how you could watch the Super Bowl and watch what Patrick Mahomes did in some of the biggest moments running for first downs and being like, no, we're good. We're good with having our guy just sit as a statue, dead ass in the pocket and saying, hey, Nick Bosa, how many points do they score, by the way, if Mahomes couldn't move around? Nick Bosa annihilated the Kansas City Chiefs, and they found a way to win still because of playmaking. That has to be noticed by the head coach of this team, that if he makes a bad play call, Drake Maye can make you right. Jayden Daniels can really make you right. I don't know how much Bo Nix can, but probably more than Kirk Cousins because he's got some wheels.
Yep.
They've got to realize this. So I think that Maye is, in my mind, the absolute best pick because he's the best of both worlds. He's got the arm talent. You can teach him to identify all the stuff. It's going to take a little while, and that's another thing that they've got to be willing to do is be patient with taking a rookie from North Carolina. But my gosh, you're not in a position to win the Super Bowl this year. So this is what you should be doing. Can you, before we wrap up, tell me a little more about the edge rushing class? Because if they lose Danielle Hunter, do you even know? Can you guess who the only under contract edge rusher the Vikings have right now? Like, do you have any idea?
Is it his name is escaping me right now. DJ Wanham?
That is a great guess. He is a free agent. It is
Ooh.
in the same range. We actually talked about him because he had a standout Senior Bowl when the Vikings picked him.
How many years ago are we talking? This is I love draft trivia and I should know this.
3 years ago, went to Pitt.
Oh yeah. What's his name? Patrick Jones.
There you go. That's
He's
the
the
guy.
only
That's
one.
it.
Oh
Yes.
man, no wonder Trevor had Jared Verse going there at 11. That's beyond quarterback. That is the number one need, right? Has to be.
Yeah, because they're losing. Well, they could lose Danielle Hunter, DJ Wanham, and Marcus Davenport. So then that leaves Patrick Jones. There may be other people under contract technically at the edge rusher position, but not that played. So like
Okay.
Patrick Jones is the only one who played. And if you were wondering, out of all people with his snap count this year, he was last by PFF grade. So not really somebody to be excited about for the future. Tell me about the edge rushing class because they need this, whether it's at 11 and trade down, whether it's second round. Like, this is important.
Good news for the Vikings that the quarterback class is good at the top and it's deep, and so is the edge rusher group. I don't know. It's still too early, and even probably more so, of course, than the quarterback spot. The edge rusher range for where they will go gets more crystallized after the combine, like three cones and verticals and all that, and just like wingspan all comes out. It's a really, really good edge rusher class. I could see, I don't know, rough estimate 5 or 6 going in the first round. There's 2 from Alabama, Dallas Turner, who was a big recruit and had a great final season, Chris Braswell, Laiatu Latu from UCLA, Chop Robinson from Penn State is like, I don't want to say Von Miller, but he is like the small, bendy, explosive type. Latu is like the bigger, just the name that pops into my head. He's like a Montez Sweat. He's really tall and long. Braylon Trice from Washington is the lesser athlete, but great pass rushing moves. Jared Verse, obviously, 2 back-to-back seasons at Florida State after transferring from Albany, and just was awesome in the ACC. Like, who could have ever known that a transfer portal guy from Albany could really hit the ground running in the ACC? Even Darius Robinson, who, speaking of the Senior Bowl, had a great week in Mobile. He's kind of that more of the Vikings prototype. He's like 6'5", 280-ish, plays inside, outside. It's a really, really good edge rusher group. They don't have to pick one at 11. If they want to go a different route, they want to go Trevor's route and then trade back up to get a quarterback. Round 2 and round 3, we'll look back in a couple years. There'll be 3 or 4 Pro Bowl caliber guys at the edge rusher spot from this class.
And as you mentioned, we will be diving into other positions that are not quarterback. But since we just had a rumor, you don't have to ask me twice to talk about trade up opportunities for the Vikings in this draft. So, well, thank you to Trevor Sikkema of PFF for giving us a very interesting mock to discuss. And maybe we need some music or something. Like I saw that Paramore was doing a "Burning Down the House." If you know that song, we could do like breaking down the mock.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
I like to play on words. I'm down for that.
Okay. All right. Chris, well, we will do this again next week. And then I think, is it 2 shows from now? We will be in Indianapolis, pounding out a bunch of shows with all sorts of different angles. We'll be hearing from the coach, from the general manager. We'll be able to talk about all that. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah. So that combine, our first episode in Indy will be right after you and like a small group of Vikings media will have just talked to Kevin O'Connell and the GM, right? So we'll have a lot
At
to
least
get to.
as the schedule is set up right now. Yep, that's going to be
Okay.
how it is. We'll be able to break that down. So,
Sweet.
yeah, man, every year it seems like we go to the combine with a lot to find out from the GM and the head coach. And last year we did get a lot of smoke signals toward like where they were standing with Kirk Cousins and different things like that. So we'll see what we can pick up on and investigate this year. So thanks, Chris, as always, and we will see you very soon.
Football.
Football.